Hello and welcome. My name is Matthew Markwitz, and this is the 10th video in the Unity Finals series with the Mega Man Mario mix-up level. In this particular video, I want to show you guys the concept of parallaxing backgrounds. If I actually jump over to the demo scene that I created before, and hit play so we can see this. This is something I showed in the very first video, but you can kind of see how the background elements, the pipe, the building, and then the way background all move at different speeds than the foreground of Mario. So what I want to show you guys, not necessarily a step-by-step process to do this, but I do want to kind of show you some of the concepts behind it. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to click on my 2D up here, switch it to a 3D view so that we can kind of really see what's going on here with my version of parallaxing. Keeping in mind there's multiple ways of doing parallaxing, but this is the method that I know. And this right here is your main camera as I have selected, but you quickly notice that as I move this main camera, and as we can see over here when I expand it, it's actually 4 cameras in one, hence the 4 layers. Now it's not as simple as just throwing in 4 cameras, of course, but we can kind of see in our little preview, right? And I'm going to move this a little bit out of the way here so we can see a little bit better, but we can kind of see in our camera preview, right, what is being rendered in the main camera. And notice that none of the background elements are being rendered. If I select background 1, we get pipes. I select background camera 2, I have these buildings, and background camera 3, which is the far cityscape. Now these I named, and you can do the same thing. You can always come up here and do game object and create a camera, name it whatever you want, and drag it onto your main camera. And this way, whatever the main camera does, so does the other cameras. You want them to move accordingly. So you don't necessarily need to put a smooth follow script in every one of them. You just put the smooth follow script on the main cameras I showed you before, and all of the children, notice they don't have those scripts, will just move fine because they will move with the main camera. Now I want you to notice something in particular about some of these cameras here. The main camera is, as I showed you before, a orthographic view. Okay. However, all 3 of these, or any of the other views, if you want them to move at different speeds, must be set as a perspective. And then the perspective is controlled by the camera's closeness basically to the scene. So if you move an orthographic camera, say I take the orthographic camera and move it, remember that doesn't actually change anything as far as the foreground. Notice that the background elements are all moving because these 3 cameras are perspective. So just like perspective, when you move far away, the object gets smaller. However, an orthographic, which is the front camera and what's rendering the foreground elements, none of that stuff moves. So the depth and how close those objects are dependent on how far the camera is to the object. So if I was to say take this object and just move this one, notice how my pipes will change. If I want them to look like they're huge, you know, but they're still far away, you can do that. But I kind of had them at a distance that makes sense. Obviously, if you make them too big, and if you move them behind the main camera, right, they'll just disappear anyways. But you can kind of see that, or behind the sprites themselves. So you're not going to render everything because you're in that view. Okay, so that's how you can control the depth of any of these objects, really, and the size of them. You kind of have to play around with them. There's no set way of doing it. It's going to be up to you how you want it to look, but as you begin to set those different elements in the background, you move your camera at different distances, and you'll get that effect that you're kind of shooting for. So, as I said before, it's not as simple as literally just dropping in the cameras. Remember, once again, perspective for these 3 cameras. But the other main thing that we need to keep in mind is our clear flags area on the cameras. You want to set all of them to be depth only, with the exception of the background. So whatever one you decide is the main background, which I decide is this one, I set it to solid color. I guess you can also set it to skybox or whatever. But in this case, because the background's so black, if I do ever, for some reason, see the edge of the universe, it would just look black, right? But you want it to be able to render through into the level behind it, and so on and so forth. And that's why each camera is set to depth only all the way till we get to the back one. Now, the way you organize the distance of your cameras is through a depth channel right here, or the depth dialog. My main camera is set to a 0 depth. So that is the foreground. So then I will have the background camera number 1 set to -1. Background camera number 2, and I'm not sure why it's not, but should be set to -2. And then background camera number 3 should be set to -3. 3. Now the reason why that all kind of popped like that was because momentarily as I set the other one, which is this one here, the buildings, to -2, and the third one was still -1, basically the buildings were rendered behind these giant sprites, and basically you couldn't see them at all. So do pay attention to the depth. That's kind of how you create which layer renders over what. And then finally, in order to tell the camera exactly which things you want to render, this is all based on their layers. So you see right here I have a culling mask. Anything under the one-way layer, okay, is going to be rendered. Now this might be a little odd. Of course you wouldn't want your one-way platforms to be rendered on something else. Previously, this is actually a result of a weird bug in Unity. When you create a scene and change layers in it, and then even move to a different computer, your layers kind of disappear. So when you go over to create a new layer, so I add layer over here, you notice that I've created my ground in one way for the demos, and the rest of these are blank. Well, the thing is, if I had typed anything in here before, so maybe I called this one pipes, like this layer is called pipes, and that's what I'm going to put my pipes on. If I go to a different computer and I load up my scene, this will be blank. It'll just say it's like an unnamed layer or something. If I go in for any reason and retype in layer 10 and call it whatever I want, it's going to be renamed that. So that's why that's one way. I didn't actually necessarily choose one way. I think I probably had something called pipes before, right? I know it's a little bit confusing. But the other thing is you can choose multiple layers. So if I have a couple of layers of things that I tag, I can do like one way and pipes, and in this case, because I did have the buildings on a layer 10 that I called pipes, now it's rendering those buildings twice. So it does look a little silly when you do that, and you can even set it to do everything. You'll see right here that everything is being rendered all at the same time, so you kind of get a double effect. If I was actually to play the map, you would notice that everything's being rendered twice by those two cameras. It looks a little ridiculous. I don't obviously recommend doing that, even though it kind of could be a cool effect. It does render way too much, and it kind of slows your resources down. But you can set it to be nothing also, so it's literally rendering nothing, or just go in and choose the particular layer that you want. So in this case, one way, which is the pipes. But that's basically the general concept behind parallaxing, right? An illusion of depth within your 2D map. Hopefully that helps, and I will see you guys in the next video.